The glass towers of New York City reflected the evening sun as Victoria Hayes walked through the empty halls of her company. She was 32 years old and already worth $40 billion. Her tech company Apex Dynamics had just finished another record-breaking quarter, and she felt like celebrating. Most of her employees had gone home, but Victoria stayed late because she loved walking through the building when it was quiet. It made her feel powerful to know that all of this belonged to her. She was talking on her phone about a major business deal when she almost bumped into someone. It was the night janitor with his cleaning cart. The man was older with gray hair, and he stepped aside politely. Victoria was about to keep walking, but something made her stop. Maybe it was the wine she had during the celebration dinner. Or maybe she just felt playful, but she decided to have some fun. She looked at the janitor and smiled in a way that was not really kind. The man wore a simple blue uniform with a name tag that said Marcus Johnson. He looked tired, but his eyes were calm and steady. Victoria thought it would be amusing to ask him something ridiculous. She asked him what his name was, and he told her it was Marcus Johnson. Then Victoria laughed and said she had a funny question for him. She told him she was about to invest $3 billion tomorrow and wanted to know if she should put it in quantum computing or deep space mining. She expected him to look confused or maybe laugh nervously and walk away. That was the whole point of the joke. But Marcus did not do any of those things. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment, and then he carefully set down his mop. He said neither. Victoria stopped smiling. She asked him what he meant, and Marcus said she was asking the wrong question. He told her the real question was not where to put $3 billion, but whether humanity was ready for what was coming in the next 18 months. Victoria crossed her arms and felt annoyed now instead of amused. She asked him what exactly was coming, and expected him to say something about the economy, or maybe some conspiracy theory about the government. Marcus pulled a small worn notebook from his pocket. He asked her if she had heard of the Kepler system. Victoria blinked because she had not expected that answer. She said yes, it was an exoplanet system, and asked what about it. Marcus said that 3 weeks ago the telescope had detected something near the fourth planet in that system. He said it was a geometric energy signature that was not natural. Then he said something that made Victoria feel cold. He mentioned signal classification Omega-7. That was classified information. Only 5 people in her entire company knew about Omega-7, and Victoria was one of them. The signal had been detected by her satellite division and locked behind 7 layers of security. Victoria felt her heart start beating faster. She demanded to know how he could possibly know about that. Marcus looked at her with those calm, steady eyes and said that 20 years ago, he had been Dr. Marcus Johnson. He said he was the lead astrophysicist for NASA, and he had been waiting for this signal his entire life. Victoria did not know what to say. She told him he was lying, because if he was really some famous scientist, then what was he doing cleaning floors in her building? Marcus smiled, but it was a sad smile. He asked if he could show her something and pointed to a bench nearby. Victoria knew she should just walk away, but something made her sit down. Marcus opened his notebook and showed her pages filled with complex math and star charts. Victoria recognized some of the equations because they were similar to what her team had been using to study the Omega-7 signal. Marcus explained that in 2005 he had published a paper predicting that humanity would detect the first alien signal between 2025 and 2027. He said the scientific community had laughed at him. They said his math was based on too many assumptions and that he was a dreamer chasing fantasy. He lost his job at NASA. And he lost his reputation, and he lost everything. He turned the pages and showed her old newspaper clippings about his fall from grace. Victoria looked at the photos and recognized his face from the articles. He looked younger in the pictures, but it was definitely the same man. Marcus said he had been right all along. He said the signal Victoria's company detected 3 weeks ago matched exactly what he had predicted. He told her it was not random noise from space. It was a message, and it was also a warning. Victoria's phone kept buzzing with messages from her team, but she ignored it. She asked Marcus what kind of warning. Marcus looked directly into her eyes and told her the signal contained a mathematical countdown. He said according to his calculations, first contact would happen in about 18 months. But then he said something even more shocking. He told her the signal was not actually coming from the Kepler system. Victoria asked what he meant because her satellites had tracked the source. Marcus explained that her satellites had only found a relay point. He said the actual source was much closer. The signal was coming from inside their own solar system, from something that had been watching Earth for a long time, and now it had decided to reveal itself. Victoria felt like her world was turning upside down. She asked Marcus why he was telling her all this. She asked why he did not go to the government or the news media. Marcus said quietly that he had tried that before and it had destroyed his life. But Victoria had something he did not have. She had resources and money, and people listened to her. She had the power to help humanity prepare for what was coming. That $3 billion she had joked about needed to go towards something much more important than business profits. Victoria sat there on the bench in the empty hallway of her building and realized that everything had just changed. A few minutes ago she had been mocking a janitor, and now that same man was telling her that aliens were real and they were coming to Earth. She did not know if she believed him, but she knew one thing for certain. She had to find out if he was telling the truth. Victoria did not go home that night. She took Marcus to her private office on the top floor, and they spent hours going through his research. The notebook was filled with 20 years of calculations and observations and predictions. Marcus explained each page patiently while Victoria listened and asked questions. She was good at math and science, even though she had built her career in business. The more she looked at his work, the more it made sense. Around midnight, Victoria made a decision. She called Peter Walsh, who was her chief technology officer. Peter was one of the 5 people who knew about the Omega-7 signal. She told him to come to the office immediately and not to ask questions. Peter lived an hour away, but he arrived looking confused and worried. He probably thought there was some kind of emergency with the company. Victoria handed him Marcus's notebook without explaining anything. She told him to look at the equations on page 17. Peter was a brilliant scientist, and he had been working on analyzing the Omega-7 signal for weeks. His eyes got very wide as he read the page. He looked up at Victoria and asked where she had gotten this information. He said these were the exact solutions his team had been trying to figure out. 3 different groups of scientists had been working on the problem, and nobody could solve it. But whoever wrote these equations had solved everything. Marcus stepped forward and introduced himself. He explained that the signal used a special compression algorithm based on prime numbers up to the power of 13. He said Peter's teams had only been calculating up to the power of 11. That was why they could not decode it properly. Peter stared at Marcus like he was seeing a ghost. He asked who Marcus really was. For the next several hours, the 3 of them worked together. Peter pulled up classified data from the company's satellite network on his laptop. He started running new calculations based on what Marcus had shown them. The office filled with papers and coffee cups and the glow of computer screens. As the sun started to rise, Peter suddenly stopped typing. He said, "Oh my God," very quietly. Victoria asked what he had found. Peter turned his laptop screen so they could see it. There was a 3-dimensional map of the solar system on the display. A small point of light was blinking in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Peter explained that Marcus was right. The signal was not coming from the Kepler system. It was bouncing off something there like a mirror, but the real source was much closer. According to the data, there was an object in the asteroid belt that was about 2 kilometers wide. It was in a location where there should only be small rocks. The object had been there for at least 15 years, but it had been hidden somehow. Now it was broadcasting actively. Victoria felt her hands shaking. She asked if Peter was saying that an alien spaceship had been sitting in their solar system for 15 years. Peter nodded slowly. He said the ship was using some kind of camouflage that made it look like a regular asteroid. But 3 weeks ago it had turned off the camouflage and started sending signals. The question was why. Marcus said he thought the aliens had been watching humanity and waiting. He said they were probably waiting for humans to reach a certain level of technology, or maybe they were waiting to see if humans would destroy themselves first. The countdown in the signal was important. Marcus believed it was a deadline. Humanity had 18 months to prove they were worth meeting. If humans failed the test, then the aliens would leave. Or maybe they would decide that humans were dangerous and needed to be stopped. Victoria asked what would happen if the aliens decided humans were dangerous. Marcus did not answer right away. He looked old and tired in the morning light. Finally, he said he did not know, but he did not want to find out. That was why he had spent 20 years preparing. That was why he had tried to warn people even when they laughed at him. And that was why he was telling Victoria now. Peter asked what they should do. Victoria stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the city waking up below. Millions of people going about their normal lives with no idea that everything was about to change. She thought about her company and her money and her reputation. She had built an empire by taking risks and making bold decisions. This was the biggest decision she would ever make. She turned around and told them she was calling an emergency board meeting. Peter said she could not tell the board about aliens because they would think she was crazy. They would vote to remove her as CEO. Victoria said she was not going to tell them everything, not yet, but she was going to change what the company did, and she needed Marcus to help her make a plan. Marcus asked what kind of plan. Victoria said they had 18 months to prepare humanity for first contact. That meant building technology that could communicate with the aliens. It meant creating systems that could defend Earth if necessary. It meant getting the world ready for the biggest moment in human history. And they had to do all of this without causing panic or getting locked up in a mental hospital. Marcus smiled for the first time since Victoria had met him in the hallway. He said he had been thinking about this for 20 years. He walked to the whiteboard in Victoria's office and started drawing diagrams. He explained that they needed to create what he called the Deep Space Defense Initiative. They would tell people it was about protecting Earth from asteroids, which was not completely a lie. The company would build advanced rockets and communication systems and detection networks. All of this would be useful when the aliens actually arrived. Victoria asked what the real goal was. Marcus said they were building a bridge. When the aliens came to Earth, humans needed to be ready to talk as equals, not as primitive creatures waiting to be saved or conquered. Humans needed to show they had technology and organization and intelligence. Most importantly, humans needed to show they wanted peace, but were also strong enough to defend themselves. Peter said it was a good plan, but it would cost billions of dollars. Victoria laughed and said she had $3 billion ready to invest. She had asked Marcus for advice, and now she was taking it. This was the most important investment anyone would ever make. It was an investment in the future of the entire human race. The emergency board meeting happened that same afternoon. Victoria had never called an emergency meeting in her 10 years running Apex Dynamics. The board members arrived looking worried and curious. They sat around the long conference table in the executive room on the 40th floor. Victoria stood at the head of the table with a presentation ready on the large screen. Behind her, she had spent the morning working with Marcus to create a plan that sounded reasonable without revealing the truth about aliens. Marcus was in a private office down the hall where he could listen to the meeting through a video call. Peter sat next to Victoria looking nervous. They both knew this meeting would either work or end with Victoria losing control of her own company. Victoria started by thanking everyone for coming on short notice. She said the company was about to make a major strategic shift. The board members glanced at each other. Gregory Hall, who was the oldest member, asked what kind of shift. Victoria clicked to the first slide of her presentation. It showed images of space and asteroids and satellites. She explained that Apex Dynamics was going to invest heavily in space technology, not just satellites for communication, but actual deep space systems. She said they would develop advanced propulsion engines and detection grids and defense networks. The goal was to protect Earth from potential asteroid impacts and establish the company as the leader in space infrastructure. She said this was the future of human civilization, and Apex Dynamics would be at the front of it. The board members looked skeptical. Margaret Liu, who handled finances, asked how much this would cost. Victoria said they would redirect 30% of the company's current resources. That meant billions of dollars over the next 2 years. The room erupted with protests. Gregory said this sounded like a vanity project. He said space mining was decades away from making any profit. Other board members agreed. They said shareholders would be angry. They said the stock price would drop. They said Victoria was risking everything the company had built. Victoria let them talk for a few minutes. Then she raised her hand for silence. Her voice was calm but firm when she spoke. She said this was not about mining asteroids for profit. This was about survival and leadership. She told them that in the next 2 years the world would change in ways they could not imagine. The countries and companies that controlled space technology would control the future. She said she was not asking for their permission. She was informing them of what would happen. Gregory stood up and said Victoria could not just make decisions like this on her own. Victoria reminded him that she owned 52% of the company stock. She had majority control. She could override any objections they made. It was a bold move, and everyone in the room knew it. Victoria had never used her power this way before. She had always worked with the board and listened to their advice. But this was different. This was too important. The board members argued for another hour, but eventually they gave up. They agreed to support the new direction, even though several of them clearly thought Victoria had lost her mind. When the meeting finally ended, Victoria felt exhausted. Peter waited until everyone else left and then asked if she was okay. Victoria said she did not know. She had just bet her entire company and reputation on the word of a janitor who claimed aliens were coming. If Marcus was wrong, she would lose everything, but Marcus was not wrong. Over the next few weeks, Victoria began quietly recruiting scientists and engineers. She could not tell them the real reason for the projects, but she offered them enough money and freedom that the best minds in the world started paying attention. She hired aerospace engineers from NASA and physicists from universities and programmers who specialized in artificial intelligence and communication systems. Marcus worked under a cover identity as a senior consultant. Victoria told people he was a distant relative named Dr. Marcus Hayes. Only Victoria and Peter knew who he really was. Marcus guided the development of every system. He seemed to know exactly what problems would come up before they happened. His 20 years of preparation were finally being put to use. One of the new hires was a woman named Helen Cruz. She had been an engineer at NASA years ago. When she saw Marcus's name on a technical paper that Apex Dynamics published, she could not believe it. She called the company immediately and asked to speak with Dr. Marcus Hayes. When Marcus got on the phone, Helen started crying. She said she had worked with him decades ago and never believed what people said about him. She had always known his theories were correct. Marcus asked Helen if she wanted to join the team. Within a week, Helen was working at Apex Dynamics. She brought 3 other scientists with her. They had all been friends with Marcus back when he worked at NASA. They had all been pushed out of their jobs or ignored by the scientific community because they supported Marcus's research. Now they were together again, working on the most important project in human history. The team grew to 20 people, and then 50. They worked in a secure facility that Victoria had built outside the city. The official story was that they were developing next-generation satellite technology. The real work was much more important. They were building a quantum communication array that could interface with the alien signal. They were creating a massive database of human knowledge and culture. They were preparing humanity's introduction to the galaxy. Victoria also started reaching out to world governments. She could not tell them about the aliens yet, but she pushed for more funding for space programs. She advocated for international cooperation. Some politicians thought she was just another rich person with strange ideas, but others listened. The Chinese Space Agency contacted her about working together. The European Space Agency proposed a joint satellite project. Even NASA started sharing some of their deep space data. Peter told Victoria one evening that she was building an alliance without people knowing what they were allying for. Victoria said that when the time came, they would need every country working together. Right now, she was just laying the groundwork. She was creating connections and relationships that would matter when first contact happened. But as the months passed, Victoria felt the weight of the secret growing heavier. She was steering humanity toward an encounter with aliens, and almost nobody knew it was coming. She had trouble sleeping. She kept thinking about what would happen if she was wrong, or if the aliens were hostile, or if humanity was not ready. Marcus told her that doubt was natural, but they had to keep moving forward. The countdown continued whether they were ready or not. 6 months after that night in the hallway, everything was in motion. Apex Dynamics had transformed from a tech company into something much bigger. They had partnerships around the world. They had the best scientists working on projects that would change everything. And somewhere in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, an alien spacecraft waited and watched to see what humanity would do next. 8 months had passed since Victoria met Marcus in that hallway. The alien countdown showed that 10 months remained until the projected contact date. Apex Dynamics had built an observation center in the New Mexican desert, specifically to monitor the signal from the asteroid belt. Marcus spent most of his time there, now surrounded by computers and telescopes and scientists who had devoted their lives to finding answers among the stars. It was 3 in the morning when Marcus noticed something different about the signal. He had been working late as usual when the pattern on his screen changed. For 8 months, the signal had been steady and predictable. It was a mathematical sequence that counted down slowly but never varied. Now suddenly there was something new layered over the original pattern. Marcus felt his heart race as he studied the change. He immediately called Victoria and Peter on the emergency line. Victoria arrived by helicopter at dawn with Peter beside her. They found Marcus standing in front of a massive display screen that showed the signal analysis in real time. Marcus looked like he had not slept, but his eyes were bright with excitement and maybe a little fear. He told them the signal was responding. For 6 months, the team had been broadcasting messages toward the asteroid belt. They had sent mathematical proofs and scientific data and recordings of human culture, and now the aliens were acknowledging that they had received everything. Peter sat down at a computer terminal and started working to decode the new pattern. Victoria and Marcus watched in tense silence. The room was filled with the quiet hum of machines and the clicking of Peter's keyboard. After 30 minutes, Peter leaned back in his chair and said he had translated it. The new signal was a question. The aliens were asking humanity to solve a problem. It was a complex mathematical proof that required understanding of quantum mechanics and temporal physics and dimensional theory. Victoria asked if this was a test. Marcus nodded slowly. He explained that every intelligent species that develops technology reaches a critical point. Some species destroy themselves through war or environmental collapse. Some species stop advancing and stagnate. Some species continue to evolve and grow. The aliens wanted to know which category humans fell into. They wanted to see if humanity was smart enough and cooperative enough to be worth contacting. Peter asked if they could solve the problem. He said it was extremely difficult and touched multiple scientific disciplines. They would need experts in fields they had not even considered yet. Victoria made a decision. She said they needed to expand the inner circle. They needed more people who knew the truth about the signal and what was coming. It was a risk, but they had no choice. Over the next week, Victoria brought in specialists from around the world. She told them about the alien signal, but not yet about the spaceship in the asteroid belt. She showed them the evidence and the mathematical proofs and the recordings of the signal exchanges. The response was incredible. Some scientists were skeptical at first, but the data was undeniable. Others were excited beyond words. A few were terrified, but all of them wanted to help. Dr. Lisa Monroe was a quantum physicist from Cambridge University. She had won awards for her research on particle behavior and dimensional mathematics. When Victoria showed her the alien equation, Lisa stared at it for 10 minutes without speaking. Then she said it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She asked how soon she could start working on it. Carlos Ruiz was a former astronaut who had spent 6 months on the International Space Station. He understood orbital mechanics and space systems better than almost anyone. When he heard about the signal, he volunteered immediately. He said he had always known humanity was not alone in the universe, and now he had a chance to prove it. Kevin Park was a mathematician who specialized in solving impossible problems. He had worked for the government on encryption and code breaking. The alien equation fascinated him because it used mathematical principles that humans had never considered. He said solving it would advance human knowledge by decades. The team grew to 30 people working around the clock. They broke the problem into smaller pieces and assigned each piece to specialists. Lisa worked on the quantum mechanics portions. Carlos analyzed the spatial geometry. Kevin tackled the pure mathematics. Marcus coordinated everything and made sure the different pieces would fit together into a coherent answer. The world started to notice that something was happening at apex dynamics. Rumors spread through scientific communities about a major discovery. News outlets speculated about breakthroughs in quantum computing or new propulsion systems. Reporters tried to get interviews with Victoria, but she declined all requests. She released vague statements about advanced research projects and left it at that. The team worked for 3 weeks straight. They barely slept. They lived in the research facility and filled whiteboards with equations and arguments and solutions. There were moments of frustration when nothing seemed to work. There were moments of breakthrough when pieces suddenly clicked into place. Victoria visited often to check on progress and bring encouragement. She had never felt more proud of what humans could accomplish when they worked together. On a Tuesday afternoon, Lisa ran into the main lab shouting that they had done it. The proof was complete. Everyone gathered around as she explained the final solution. Marcus checked her work carefully, going through each step of the logic. His hands trembled slightly as he verified the calculations. After an hour, he looked up and said it was correct. This was humanity's answer to the test. They broadcast the solution toward the asteroid belt that same day. Then they waited. Nothing happened for 3 days. Victoria barely left the observation center. She paced the halls and drank too much coffee and tried not to think about what would happen if the aliens rejected their answer. Marcus seemed calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Peter made jokes to lighten the mood, but nobody really laughed. On the 4th day, the signal changed again. Marcus called everyone to the main display screen. The new pattern was different from anything they had seen before. It took Peter an hour to translate it, but when he did, everyone in the room started cheering. The aliens were pleased with the solution. They confirmed that contact would proceed as scheduled. But there was more information in the message. The aliens were sending coordinates. Victoria asked what the coordinates were for. Peter pulled up a map and entered the numbers. A location appeared on the screen. It was in Nevada in the United States, an empty stretch of desert not far from where the government had once tested secret aircraft. The aliens were telling humanity exactly where they wanted to land. They were giving humans time to prepare a proper greeting. This was really happening. In less than 6 months, aliens would arrive on Earth and everything would change forever. Victoria knew she could not keep the secret anymore. 6 months remained until the aliens arrived and humanity deserved to know the truth. She had spent weeks planning how to reveal the information. It had to be done carefully to avoid mass panic, but it also had to be done publicly so that everyone heard the same message at the same time. She decided to make the announcement at the Global Technology Summit in Geneva, where world leaders and scientists and business executives gathered every year. Victoria had negotiated a keynote speaking slot. The organizers thought she would talk about apex dynamics and space technology. They had no idea what she was really going to say. Marcus stood backstage with her while she prepared to walk out to an audience of 5,000 people. Millions more would be watching the live stream around the world. Victoria felt more nervous than she had ever felt in her life. Marcus asked if she was sure about this. He said once she told the world there would be no going back. Everything would change. Victoria looked at him and said she had never been more sure of anything. Humanity deserved the truth. People deserved a chance to prepare together instead of being kept in the dark. Marcus squeezed her shoulder and told her she was brave. Then the announcer called her name and Victoria walked onto the stage. The applause was polite and respectful. Victoria stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. She took a deep breath and began her presentation. The first slides showed images of space and satellites and the work Apex Dynamics had been doing. She talked about advances in technology and the importance of space exploration. The audience listened, but nobody seemed particularly excited. This was all fairly standard material for a tech summit. Then Victoria shifted her tone. She said she had something important to reveal, something that would change how humanity understood its place in the universe. The room got very quiet. Victoria clicked to a new slide that showed the signal data from the asteroid belt. She said that 6 months ago Apex Dynamics had detected an anomaly, not from the distant edges of the galaxy but from within the solar system itself. A signal, a message. And yes, it was extraterrestrial in origin. The room erupted. People started talking loudly to each other. Some stood up from their seats. Camera flashes went off everywhere. Victoria raised her hand and asked for silence. She knew people would be skeptical. She knew many would think this was a hoax or a publicity stunt. That was why she had prepared extensive evidence. She told them she was not asking anyone to just believe her words. She showed the raw signal data on the screens. She displayed the mathematical sequences and the decoded messages. She showed the responses that the alien source had sent back when humanity had answered their test. Everything was there for anyone with scientific knowledge to verify and analyze. Then Victoria did something that surprised even the people who knew her well. She invited Marcus onto the stage. She introduced him as Dr. Marcus Johnson, the former NASA astrophysicist who had predicted this exact event 20 years ago. Marcus walked out looking uncomfortable with the attention but determined. Victoria saw several older scientists in the audience recognize him immediately. There were gasps and whispered conversations spreading through the crowd. Victoria explained that Marcus had been working with Apex Dynamics for the past 6 months. She said he had been leading a team of scientists from 12 different countries. They had been communicating with the alien source and preparing for contact. She told the audience that the aliens had been observing Earth from a position in the asteroid belt. In approximately 6 months, they would arrive at Earth for direct contact. They had already provided specific coordinates for where they wanted to land. The room exploded with questions. People were shouting and demanding more proof. Some called it impossible. Others looked terrified. Victoria had anticipated all of this. She played video recordings of the signal exchanges. She showed testimony from respected scientists who had verified the findings. She displayed the mathematical proof that humanity had solved, and the alien response confirming it was correct. She gave them every piece of evidence she had. Within an hour, the announcement had spread across every news network on the planet. Victoria's face was on every screen. Social media exploded with reactions. Some people claimed it was an elaborate hoax created by a billionaire who wanted attention. Others believed immediately and started preparing for the end of the world. Religious groups had conflicting reactions. Scientists demanded access to the raw data so they could verify the claims themselves. World leaders were caught completely off guard. The United Nations called an emergency session. The President of the United States demanded to know why the government had not been informed earlier. Victoria had expected anger from officials, but she stood by her decision. She said she had tried to work with governments quietly, but they had been too slow to act. Humanity needed to prepare quickly, and that required public knowledge and cooperation. The next few days were chaos. Victoria gave interview after interview explaining the situation. Marcus appeared on scientific programs to discuss the technical details. Peter worked with international teams to share all the data that Apex Dynamics had collected. Some governments tried to seize control of the landing site coordinates, but Victoria had already made arrangements with the United Nations to establish it as an international zone. Not everyone reacted well to the news. Some countries accused Victoria of trying to control first contact for her own benefit. Conspiracy theorists claimed the whole thing was a plot by corporations to gain power. Religious extremists said the aliens were demons coming to destroy humanity. There were protests and riots in several cities around the world. The stock market crashed and then recovered and then crashed again as investors panicked. But there were also positive reactions. Scientists around the world began collaborating like never before. Space agencies that had competed for decades suddenly started working together. Artists and musicians created works inspired by the coming contact. Teachers developed new curricula to help children understand what was happening. Ordinary people started talking to their neighbors about hope and fear and the future of humanity. Victoria watched all of this unfold from her office. She had released the secret, and now she had to live with the consequences. Marcus found her one evening staring out the window at the city below. He asked how she was feeling. Victoria said she did not know. She had just told 7 billion people that aliens were real and coming to Earth. Some of those people hated her for it. Some praised her. Most were just confused and scared. Marcus said she had done the right thing. He said humanity needed time to process this information and prepare mentally as well as technologically. Fear and confusion were natural reactions, but they would pass. What mattered was that people now knew the truth. They could make their own choices about how to respond. That was better than keeping them ignorant until the aliens suddenly appeared. Victoria asked Marcus if he thought humanity was ready. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said humanity would never be completely ready for something like this. But being aware and trying to prepare was better than being caught off guard. The next 6 months would test humanity in ways they had never been tested before. But Marcus believed that people were stronger and more adaptable than they often realized. Time would tell if he was right. The 5 months after Victoria's announcement were the most chaotic in human history. Governments struggled to maintain order as people reacted in wildly different ways to the news of alien contact. Some religious groups declared that the coming aliens were angels sent by God to save humanity. Other religious groups insisted they were demons coming to destroy the world. Scientists argued endlessly about what the aliens might want and how humanity should respond. Military forces in every country went on high alert, though nobody knew exactly what they were supposed to be alert for. The landing site in Nevada became the focus of global attention. The United Nations took control of the area and established what they called the International Contact Zone. Construction crews worked day and night to prepare the site. They built observation platforms for world leaders and media. They installed the communication equipment that Marcus and his team had developed. They created security perimeters and emergency response systems. The desert location that had once been empty and forgotten now buzzed with activity from dawn until long after dark. Victoria found herself in a strange position. She was no longer just a CEO running a company. She had become a central figure in humanity's preparation for first contact. World leaders called her for advice. Scientists wanted her support for their theories. The media followed her everywhere she went. She had wanted to prepare humanity for this moment, but she had not expected to become the face of that preparation. Marcus handled the technical side of things. He led the team that was building the translation and communication systems. They did not know what language the aliens would use, but Marcus had developed a system based on universal mathematical principles that should allow basic communication, regardless of language barriers. He also worked with linguists and anthropologists to prepare cultural materials that would help the aliens understand humanity. It was an impossible task to represent all of human civilization in a format that aliens could comprehend, but Marcus did his best. Peter coordinated with space agencies around the world. NASA shared their deep space observation data. The European Space Agency contributed their satellite network. Even countries that normally did not cooperate were working together. China and Russia and the United States found common ground in preparing for an event that affected all of humanity equally. It was remarkable to see old enemies becoming partners, even if that partnership was driven by fear and necessity. But not everyone wanted cooperation. Some political leaders saw the alien arrival as an opportunity to gain power. A few countries tried to develop their own contact protocols in secret. Military generals in several nations advocated for defensive measures, including weapons that could potentially be used against the alien ship. Victoria and Marcus fought against these ideas publicly. They argued that showing aggression would be the worst possible approach. The aliens had given humanity advance notice and coordinates. That suggested peaceful intentions. Responding with weapons would signal that humans were dangerous and untrustworthy. The debate raged in the United Nations and in national governments and in public forums. Victoria appeared before the UN Security Council to make her case. She told them that humanity had one chance to make a good first impression. If the aliens saw weapons pointed at them, they might decide that contact was a mistake. They might leave and never come back. Or worse, they might defend themselves and humanity would start an interstellar conflict it could not possibly win. Some leaders listened to Victoria's reasoning. Others did not. The United States military moved defensive systems near the contact zone, claiming they were just precautions. Russia did the same. China deployed observation satellites to monitor the entire region. Victoria could not stop these actions, but she worked to ensure they were as minimal and non-threatening as possible. Marcus told her privately that he was worried. He had spent 20 years imagining this moment, and he had always hoped humanity would be united and peaceful. The reality was messy and complicated, and humans were still acting like the divided species they had always been. Meanwhile, ordinary people around the world tried to process what was coming. Some quit their jobs and spent their savings traveling or being with family. They believed the aliens might bring an end to life as they knew it. Others threw themselves into work and routine, trying to pretend nothing had changed. Parents struggled to explain the situation to their children. Teachers developed lesson plans about space and alien life and cultural exchange. Therapists reported huge increases in patients dealing with anxiety and existential questions. There were also beautiful moments of human connection. Communities came together to discuss their hopes and fears. Artists created murals depicting peaceful contact between humans and aliens. Musicians composed symphonies dedicated to the idea of universal harmony. Writers published stories imagining positive futures where humanity joined a larger galactic community. Not everyone was afraid. Many people felt excitement and wonder at the possibility of learning from an advanced civilization. Victoria tried to stay focused on practical preparations, but she felt the emotional weight of what was happening. She barely slept. She lost weight from stress and forgot to eat meals. Marcus noticed and started bringing her food and insisting she take breaks. He reminded her that she needed to stay healthy and strong for what was coming. The aliens would be evaluating humanity, and she would likely be one of the first people they met. She needed to represent the best of what humans could be. 3 months before the scheduled arrival date, the alien signal changed one more time. It was a brief message that Marcus translated quickly. The aliens confirmed they were on schedule and provided additional details about their ship and delegation. They would arrive with 3 representatives who would serve as ambassadors. The ship would remain in orbit while the ambassadors descended to the surface. They requested that humanity prepare a delegation of its own to meet them with representatives from different cultures and regions of Earth. The United Nations spent 2 weeks arguing about who should be in the human delegation. Every country wanted their leader included. Scientists argued that technical experts should be present. Anthropologists said cultural representatives were essential. In the end, they formed a delegation of 20 people, including Victoria and Marcus as technical advisors. The group included the UN Secretary General and leaders from major nations and respected scientists, and even a philosopher and an artist. It was meant to show the diversity and complexity of human civilization. Victoria stood in the desert one evening, 2 months before contact, looking at the prepared landing site. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. In 60 days, aliens would land in this exact spot and everything would change. She thought about that night in the hallway when she had mocked a janitor and asked him a sarcastic question about investing money. That moment had led to all of this. She had learned more in these months than in her entire life before. She had learned that wisdom could come from unexpected places. She had learned that humanity was capable of both greatness and pettiness, often at the same time. Most importantly, she had learned that the future was not something that happened to people. It was something people created through their choices and actions. Humanity's choice in 60 days would echo through history forever. The morning of first contact arrived with clear blue skies over Nevada. Victoria woke up before dawn in the temporary housing that had been built near the landing site. She had barely slept, but she felt strangely calm. After months of preparation and worry and chaos, the moment was finally here. In a few hours, humanity would meet another intelligent species for the first time in its history. Nothing she had done in her entire life had prepared her for this, but she was ready to face it. Marcus was already awake when Victoria found him in the communication center. He was checking systems and running final tests on the translation equipment. He looked old and tired, but his eyes were bright with anticipation. This was the moment he had spent 20 years working toward. The moment that had cost him his career and reputation and normal life. Now he would find out if all of that sacrifice had been worth it. The landing site had been transformed over the past months. There was a large circular platform made of polished stone in the center. Around it were observation areas for the various delegations and media. Thousands of cameras were positioned to capture every angle. Security personnel from a dozen nations maintained a wide perimeter. Beyond that, 50,000 people had gathered at designated viewing areas several miles away. Billions more would watch on screens around the world. Victoria joined the human delegation at the central platform. The UN Secretary General stood at the front, flanked by leaders from the United States and China and Russia and the European Union. Scientists and cultural representatives filled the rest of the group. Victoria stood near Marcus, who would handle any technical communication issues. Peter was in the control center monitoring all the systems. Everyone wore formal attire and tried to look calm, even though Victoria could see hands shaking and nervous glances being exchanged. The scheduled arrival time was noon exactly. As the hour approached, the crowd grew silent. Even the media stopped their constant commentary and just pointed their cameras at the empty sky. Victoria checked her watch every few seconds. 11:59. The countdown that had started 18 months ago was about to reach 0. At exactly noon, the air above the landing platform began to shimmer. It looked like heat waves rising from hot pavement, but more intense and more controlled. Victoria heard gasps from the crowd. The shimmer grew brighter and then a shape began to form. It was like watching something materialize out of nothing. The shape resolved into a massive spacecraft that was sleek and elegant, with smooth curves and a surface that seemed to shift between metallic silver and deep blue. The ship descended slowly and silently. There was no roar of engines or blast of wind. It simply lowered itself onto the landing platform with impossible grace. When it touched down, there was barely a sound. The ship was enormous up close. It had to be at least 200 meters long and 50 meters high. Yet it had landed with such precision that it centered perfectly on the platform. For 5 long minutes, nothing happened. Victoria's heart pounded in her chest. She glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. Then a section of the ship's hull became transparent, revealing a doorway. A ramp extended from the doorway to the ground. 3 figures emerged from inside the ship and began walking down the ramp. The aliens were humanoid in basic shape, with 2 arms and 2 legs and a head, but they were clearly not human. They were tall, maybe 7 feet on average, and very slender. Their skin had a luminescent quality that shifted between blue and silver like their ship. They had large eyes that were completely black with no visible pupils. They wore no obvious clothing, but their skin had patterns that might have been decorative or functional. They moved with fluid grace as they approached the human delegation. The lead alien stopped about 10 feet from the humans. Victoria noticed it had slightly different markings than the other two, suggesting it was the leader. The alien raised one hand in what could only be a gesture of peace or greeting. Then it spoke. The sound came from the alien, but not from its mouth. It was like the voice emanated from the air around it. The words were not in any human language, but Marcus's translation system immediately began processing them. A voice came through speakers that had been set up around the landing area. The translation was smooth and clear. The alien said that they were the keepers. They were observers and guides for emerging civilizations across the galaxy. They had watched humanity for many generations, waiting to see if humans would destroy themselves or reach for the stars. They said humanity had proven worthy of joining the greater community of intelligent species. The UN Secretary General stepped forward. His voice shook slightly, but he spoke with dignity. He welcomed the keepers to Earth on behalf of all humanity. He said humans were honored by their presence and eager to learn from them. Victoria felt proud of how calm he sounded, despite the unprecedented nature of the moment. Marcus took a step forward as the aliens had been told he would be the human technical liaison. He asked a question that had been prepared by the delegation. He asked why the keepers had waited so long to reveal themselves. The lead alien looked at Marcus with those large black eyes. The translated voice explained that premature contact had always ended in disaster for developing civilizations. Young species needed time to develop technology and global communication, and most importantly, wisdom. They needed to learn to cooperate despite their differences. The test the keepers had given humanity was not just about solving an equation. It was about whether humans could work together across political and cultural boundaries for a common goal. Victoria found her voice and asked if humanity had passed the test. The lead keeper turned its attention to her. The alien studied her for a moment that felt very long. Then it said yes. Humanity had passed, but not perfectly. Earth still had conflict and inequality and suffering, but humans had demonstrated the capacity for growth and cooperation. That was enough. The keepers were prepared to offer humanity a choice. The choice was simple but profound. Humanity could remain isolated and continue developing on their own timeline, with no outside interference, or humans could accept an invitation to join the galactic community as a junior member. This would bring opportunities to learn advanced technologies and meet other species and explore the stars. But it would also bring responsibilities and challenges. The decision had to be made by humanity as a whole, not by any single leader or nation. The UN Secretary General thanked the keepers for the offer and said humanity would need time to discuss such an important decision. The lead keeper inclined its head in what seemed to be understanding. It said the keepers could remain near Earth for 1 year. During that time, they would share knowledge and answer questions and allow humans to make an informed choice. This was proper protocol. A species' fate must be chosen by its own members. The formal first contact ceremony continued for another hour. Representatives from different human cultures presented gifts and symbols. The keepers accepted them with grace and presented their own gifts in return, including information crystals that contained star maps and histories of other civilizations. Scientists asked technical questions. Philosophers asked about the nature of consciousness and existence. Children who had been selected from around the world came forward to meet the aliens and showed no fear, only curiosity and wonder. As the sun began to set over the Nevada desert, the keepers prepared to return to their ship. The lead keeper spoke one final message. It said that humanity stood at a threshold. Behind them was isolation and ahead was community. Either choice was valid. Either path could lead to a good future. But the keepers believed humans were ready for the stars. They hoped humanity would choose to walk that path together. The aliens returned to their ship, which rose silently into the sky and disappeared in that same shimmer of displaced air. They did not leave Earth entirely, but took up a position in orbit where they would remain accessible. Victoria stood with Marcus watching the sky where the ship had been. She realized she was crying, though she was not sure exactly why. Relief maybe, or joy, or simply the overwhelming emotion of having witnessed something that changed everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe. The months following first contact were unlike anything humanity had experienced before. The keepers remained in orbit around Earth and began sharing information as they had promised. They sent down data about other civilizations and technologies and the history of the galactic community. Scientists around the world worked frantically to understand even a fraction of what was being offered. The information was vast and complex and beautiful. It showed that life in the universe was far more diverse and ancient than humans had imagined. The big question remained unanswered, though. Would humanity accept the invitation to join the galactic community, or would they choose to remain isolated? The United Nations organized a global discussion process that lasted for months. Every nation held debates and forums. Citizens voted in referendums. Religious leaders and scientists and ordinary people all had their say. Some argued that joining was too risky. They worried about losing human culture and independence. Others insisted that isolation would mean stagnation and humanity needed the knowledge the keepers offered. Victoria found herself traveling constantly, giving speeches and meeting with world leaders. She advocated for acceptance but tried to present both sides fairly. She believed joining was the right choice, but she understood the fears people had. Marcus traveled with her and provided technical expertise when questions arose about what joining would actually mean in practical terms. They made a good team. Victoria was the public face who could talk to politicians and media. Marcus was the scientist who could explain complex ideas in ways ordinary people could understand. Peter continued running Apex Dynamics, but the company had changed dramatically. It was no longer focused on profits. Instead, it had become a center for human-alien collaboration. Keeper scientists visited the company facilities to share technology. Human engineers worked to adapt alien concepts to Earth-based manufacturing. The company that Victoria had built to make money was now building bridges between worlds. The Keepers were patient teachers. They understood that humans needed time to process everything. They answered endless questions about life in the galaxy. They explained that there were thousands of intelligent species spread across millions of light years. Some were ancient civilizations, billions of years old. Others were young species like humanity just beginning to explore space. The galactic community had rules and structures designed to help new members integrate without being overwhelmed. Humanity would be protected and guided if they chose to join. One evening, Victoria stood with Marcus on a hillside overlooking the city where Apex Dynamics headquarters was located. They had just finished another long day of meetings and presentations. The night sky was clear and full of stars. Victoria looked up and thought about how different those stars seemed now. They were no longer distant points of light. They were homes to other beings with their own hopes and dreams and struggles. Marcus asked Victoria if she remembered that night in the hallway when they first met. She laughed and said of course she remembered. She had been so arrogant and condescending. She had mocked him without knowing anything about who he really was. Marcus said he was not offended. He said Victoria had made a choice that night that changed everything. She could have walked away from a janitor rambling about aliens. Instead, she had listened. She had been willing to consider that maybe there was more to the story than she knew. Victoria said she had learned more from Marcus than from anyone else in her life. She had learned that wisdom had nothing to do with job titles or bank accounts. She had learned that the courage to pursue truth even when everyone rejected you was worth more than any amount of success or recognition. She had learned that humanity was capable of incredible things when people worked together toward something bigger than themselves. The global vote on joining the galactic community took place 1 year after first contact. The process was complicated, because different nations had different voting systems, but the United Nations coordinated everything as fairly as possible. On the day results were announced, Victoria barely breathed as the numbers came in. It was closer than she had hoped. 58% voted yes, 42% voted no. It was not overwhelming support, but it was enough. Humanity had chosen to accept the invitation. The Keepers held a ceremony to welcome Earth as the newest member of the galactic community. Representatives from a dozen other species attended either in person or through holographic communication. Victoria watched as the Secretary General signed agreements and received official recognition. It felt surreal. Humanity was no longer alone. Earth was now part of something vast and ancient and full of possibility. In the aftermath, Victoria made a decision about her own future. She stepped down as CEO of Apex Dynamics to become Earth's first ambassador to the galactic community. It was a role that did not yet have clear definition or structure, but someone needed to do it. Victoria had been preparing for this without knowing it her entire life. All her skills in business and negotiation and leadership would be useful as humanity navigated its new relationship with alien civilizations. Marcus was appointed as Chief Scientific Liaison. After 20 years of being dismissed and forgotten, he finally received recognition for his work. Universities that had rejected him now offered him honorary degrees. The scientific community that had laughed at his theories now studied his predictions as foundational texts for xenology. Marcus accepted these honors with grace, but he told Victoria privately that the only recognition that mattered was seeing his predictions come true. He had been right all along, and that was enough. Peter continued running Apex Dynamics, which had become one of the most important companies on Earth. It served as a hub for human-alien cooperation and technology transfer. The company developed new propulsion systems based on Keeper designs. It built communication networks that connected Earth to the broader galaxy. Peter joked that he had gone from being a simple CTO to being an interstellar project manager, but he loved every minute of it. Victoria and Marcus traveled to other worlds as part of their diplomatic duties. They met species that looked nothing like humans or Keepers. They saw technologies that seemed like magic. They learned about civilizations that had solved problems humanity still struggled with. Every experience was overwhelming and humbling and exciting. They represented Earth, but they also represented the idea that any species could grow beyond their limitations if they were willing to learn and change. Sometimes when Victoria had quiet moments, she thought back to that night in the hallway. She had been at the peak of her success running a billion-dollar company and feeling invincible. Then she had encountered a janitor who challenged everything she thought she knew. That encounter had led to the most important journey humanity had ever taken. It had all started with a mocking question about where to invest $3 billion. Marcus had told her the question was wrong. He had been right. The money did not matter. What mattered was whether humanity was ready for what was coming. Thanks to their unlikely partnership, humanity had been given the chance to prepare. The preparation had been messy and imperfect and chaotic, but it had been enough. Humans had proven they could cooperate and learn and grow. They had proven they deserved a place among the stars. Victoria stood on a Keeper ship looking down at Earth from orbit. The planet looked small and fragile and beautiful against the darkness of space. Somewhere down there, billions of people were living their lives, going to work and raising families and pursuing dreams. Most of them would never travel to other worlds or meet alien species, but their lives were connected now to something vast and ancient. Their children would grow up in a universe that was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than anything previous generations had imagined. Marcus joined Victoria at the observation window. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their home world turn slowly below them. Victoria remembered asking him once if humanity was ready for first contact. Marcus had said that no species was ever completely ready for something so profound. But being aware and trying to prepare was better than being caught off guard. Humanity had been aware. They had tried. And they had succeeded, not perfectly but well enough. The stars stretched endlessly in all directions. Each one might have planets. Each planet might have life. Each life might have its own story and struggles and triumphs. Humanity was now part of that endless story. The journey had begun with a billionaire CEO and a janitor meeting by chance in an empty hallway. It continued, now with both of them working together to help their species take its first steps into a larger universe. The future was uncertain and full of challenges, but it was also full of hope and possibility. And that Victoria thought was the best investment anyone could ever make.